Hello everybody, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. So this is part 2 of my video series on the Matrix and whether we live in a real Matrix, and if so, how we can escape from it, or at the very least become aware that we're living in it. In my last video, which I will link in the description, I talked about the Matrix films and how the underlying theme of those films, to do with the human race being imprisoned inside an illusion, is a concept worth exploring in a spiritual context, and that there are good indications that the Wachowskis, when they wrote the film, were pointing people towards ancient texts such as those of Vedanta, which described the universe that we inhabit as an illusion that we must escape from to reach some higher reality. And I spoke at length about the concept of Maya. This is the world of illusion, or the world of ignorance. A false world. And so I want to explore Maya in a bit more depth today. We've established that Maya is the real Matrix, but there's more to it than that, because there are multiple levels of Maya. There are multiple levels of illusion, and in fact this unreal reality that we live in is illusion stacked upon illusion stacked upon illusion. And so I'm going to try and unpack that some more today. And if there's time, I might link it to some other ideas from other traditions from around the world. So, breaking down Maya, the first thing that we need to say, the first thing that we need to recognize is that our very perception, the very way that we sense this reality with the 5 senses, and with our ability to feel pleasure and pain, from that very moment we are perceiving the world in a way that is false. The only universe that we really know is the universe of our perception. And every model that we have that makes sense of the universe is really just a model of how the human mind thinks. It's not necessarily a reflection of the real world. This is what the philosophers of the past, particularly in the Enlightenment period, described as the great gulf that lies between phenomenon and noumenon. A phenomenon is the moment that light or sound hits our sensory organs, our brain creates a story about what it is we're seeing, and that's a phenomenon. But the noumenon, which is to say the world outside of our perception, from which that impulse originated, is something that we can never know beyond our sense perceptions. So for all we know, the real world, as it were, is something completely different to the world that we perceive. And in fact, the only world that we can know is the world that we perceive. So there's no other way that we can really go on in existence besides relying on our perceptions of things. But the point of all of this is to keep in mind that what we perceive is not necessarily what is the most real or the most authentic form of existence. But that's not necessarily something that's oppressive. We need some form of perception in order to make sense of things. And that's fine. We just need to recognize it for what it is, and not get stuck in the trap of thinking that this world that we see is the real world, because it's not. The next layer of Maya has to do with physical existence and the way that physical matter behaves, and how that is something that is very unsatisfactory for us. And I discussed this a lot in my last video, the way that things in physical existence are so limited and so perishable that we feel unsatisfied because we feel as though the things that we aspire towards should last. We should be able to have some sense of security or safety once we have certain circumstances or we have a certain thing. But the reality of what physical existence is like is very different to the expectation. We live in a world of chaos and entropy and disillusion, and yet we behave as though we live in a world that is much more certain than that. But physical existence imposes other limitations in the form of giving us only a limited perception of the way things are. This is related to the first layer of Maya. We perceive ourselves as individuals, but the only reason why we perceive ourselves as individuals is because we have a nervous system which links to a certain pair of eyes and a certain pair of ears and so forth, which is connected to a network of nerve cells that permeate a particular body. And so we take in all of that sensory information and we believe that we are an individual, that we are somehow something that is separate from the rest of the universe. But where did the cells in your body come from? Where did the matter that you are comprised of come from? Where did the air that you breathe come from? You are intrinsically a part of the universe. You are a function of the universe, and therefore you are inseparable from it. And we are always going to inhabit the universe in that way, in that symbiotic relationship. But we see ourselves as individuals and we become attached to our individuality so that we don't want to share our identity with other things in the universe, and it causes us suffering when we feel as though our individuality has been compromised somehow. But our individuality has to change because the universe itself changes and we are a part of the universe. So it is important to see past the illusion of individuality. And again, it's not necessary to escape this reality. It's not necessary to escape this level of Maya. We inhabit the natural world. We're here for a reason. For the time being, this is the life that we have to live. But we need to just recognize the falsehoods and the fallacies in the way that we perceive things, and how there might be a reality that is deeper than what we perceive. The next layer of Maya is psychological. And this is where the illusion gets more insidious. So we go through life and we have experiences, and those experiences create a certain expectation in us of how things are going to be in the future. We have interactions with certain people. We find ourselves in certain situations that make us comfortable or uncomfortable, and if we encounter a situation that's similar in the future, we project that expectation onto the situation. And this is what psychologists might refer to as having emotional or psychological baggage. We bring all of our past memories and experiences with us into new situations that have nothing to do with the old situation, quite possibly. And we distort our view of things based on our past experiences. And we all have psychological baggage that we need to work on, which is very similar to the concept of karma. Similarly, we need to work through our karma, because if we don't recognize our psychological opinions and biases as something false, if we take it for granted that that is the way that the world is, we will continue to live in an illusion. And not only that, we will develop habits that are negative, that we keep repeating over and over and over again like a broken record. And it's only by processing, first recognizing the falsehood of those habitual cycles, and then processing them and moving through them and transforming that experience, that we can overcome karma and overcome the illusion of our own psychology. And that's on the individual level. But there's also a mass psychology. And that brings me to the next layer of Maya that we will often encounter, and that is the Maya, the illusion of social structures and established systems of thought and of ideology. So we have an entire society that is built around a set of assumptions and a set of expectations that people will behave a certain way. Everybody is expected to go through school, put up with systems of education which perhaps are less concerned with actually teaching people things that are useful and more concerned with teaching them social conformity. But we're expected to just put up with that for 12 years of our life. And then we're told that we have to go to college or university, and we have to get a job, we have to get married, we have to have kids, we have to buy a house, we have to buy a car. And so the script is put in front of us, and we're just expected to follow the same script that everybody else follows. And that's a form of Maya, because you're creating an illusory world, you're creating a fake world, and then the illusion is much more confined and much more limiting than the true, free expansiveness of reality, and you're trying to force people into the ignorance of only having a prescribed way of living within that illusion. Political ideologies are another web of illusion that people can get trapped within. And economic systems, to a greater or less extent, can be illusory. But the economic system that we live under today is extremely illusory. The system of free market capitalism is just based on speculation and made up financial principles that have no bearing on anything in the natural world. It's just somebody's theory about how wealth should be generated. And as we've seen over the past decade or so, it doesn't reflect reality, and it doesn't make life better for most people. So it's absolutely an illusion. It's absolutely a false system. And so that is Maya. That is the world of Maya that we inhabit. And some of it is just things that we need to live with. The fact that we do live in this physical world, and it has certain limitations. Some limitations are a good thing. They create structure and they give us a sense of discipline. But it's when we start to feel suffocated by structure and suffocated by false systems that our development is compromised. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be thinking about ways that we can make our life less conditioned and aspire towards something transcendent, something which goes beyond conditions. And that is what it means to aspire towards Brahman. In Buddhism, that's what it means to break the cycle of samsara. And in Gnosticism, that's what it means to escape the realm of the demiurge and reunite with the pleroma. And all of these different versions of the Matrix and the way of escaping it are referred to a greater or lesser extent by the Matrix films. And so that is the path that is before us. And the way to escape the Matrix is through spiritual practice, particularly meditation. And I will be talking much more about that on this channel, and there's many different paths towards that absolute reality. And I will be talking about that in a much more detailed fashion as this channel goes on. So if you want to hear more, like and subscribe, and thanks again for listening.